Good morning. I would like to bring this February 1st, 2017 meeting of the Planning and Advisory Commission to order. If you'll please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I would like to remind those in the audience and those watching on television that this is the first reading of any rezoning request brought before us today. We will hear a reading of the staff report and ask the applicant to provide a brief overview of the request. We will then give the opportunity for anyone in the audience to speak for or against that request. The commissioners will have any needed discussion and render a decision, and then that decision will be sent back to the planning department and then on to City Council, who will hear the request 2 more times before rendering the final decision. We do not have any minutes to bring forward, but we do have some old business first. It's REZN-12-16-2478. This is a request for a text amendment to amend the text of the Unified Development Ordinance, or the UDO, in regards to Section 10.8.2, Certificate of Occupancy, and Section 10.8.1, Building Permit. Mr. Harrod, if you could give us any other information.
Sure. What we have asked to do is to change Section 10.82 and 10.81. And at this time, I'd like to go ahead and bring up John Hutchinson. He is our Director of Inspections and Codes, and he's got a presentation for you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I know we've met before. I think I've got all your questions answered and we'll be able to move forward. Ideally, like I said, when we mentioned about changing things in the UDO and what's in the code, I've kind of understood that it's more, if we're not changing the procedure, it's just changing those definitions. So the procedure for BHAR, BZA, everything is still going to be there. It's just the definition of what a building permit is and what a certificate of occupancy is will be defined like it is currently in the code. The intent is to correct, have it more succinct and that there's no conflicts. I've actually looked in my section I had in Chapter 10 was called Building Permitting, and then there's actually already a section in Chapter 8 which is called Building Construction. So even within the UDO itself, there's already things that are saying the same thing. So that's why you kind of see the explanation of the revisions, that there's a lot of things we're taking out. But if you go to Chapter 8, Article 9, it's already there. So I just want to go through, we've already talked about, I guess, the purpose, but building construction is that section. And so that already exists in the UDO. And then 2 chapters later, there's another section called building permitting. So the building construction, I really don't have a concern. The only thing I would want to take out is what's shown as underlined is interior finishes, because like we discussed in the last meeting, interior finishes are exempted from a permit. So we want to take that line out. But ideally, this is what I would prefer it to read, so then that everyone's okay. I put the when required on there because there is an opportunity for people to ask us or contact us to find out if it needs a permit. So I don't just want to say everything needs a permit, but it's when required. And the technical codes is what the codes that are in the Columbus Code, that's what they're referred to over there. So that's the building code, the plumbing code, the electrical code. All that is referred to as technical codes in there. And then also the Uniform Codes Act, which is all of these books which we enforce currently. But like I said, all of their references are all in the Columbus Code. So in Section 8, Article 9, like I said, it already refers to the things that are in Chapter 10, the airport requirements, the changes to historical properties, the building permits for on-site sewage disposal. All that's already there. And like I said, Chapter 10, building permitting, ideally, like I said, I just want to repeal those 2 sections of that chapter, and then all the pertinent info. We did add, as you can see, in your handout there that you also have the zoning verification and simultaneous submittals. So like I said, my intent is not to remove the procedure of what the UDO tells us how to do a building permit, but I just want the definitions of a building permit to be taken out. And then at the bottom there, I say all technical codes and definitions will be in Chapter 8 of the Columbus Code. So I know we had kind of a question of what is a building permit? What qualifies as a permit? So me and my staff have sat down, we've kind of gone through the books, what we typically have permitted in the past administratively, what we may not need to permit. So they fall into these 4 categories. It's either required, work exempt from a permit, repairs, and emergency repairs. So this is directly from the 2012 IBC. Any owner or authorized agent who intends to construct, enlarge, alter, repair, move, demolish, or change the occupancy of a building or structure, or to erect, install, enlarge, alter, repair, remove, or convert, or replace any electrical, gas, mechanical, or plumbing system, the installation which is regulated by this code, or to cause any work to be done, shall first make an application to the building official and obtain the required permit. I know initially we talked about the word alter, and we were like, well, can we take alter out? I went back to my staff and I said, hey, is that something we should look at? And then once we talked, we were saying, no, because you can affect your egress and you can affect other things in the building without making structural alterations. So say the Family Dollar on Veterans Parkway all of a sudden wants to become a daycare. Technically, it's structurally sufficient the way it is now, but if they start putting different type of partitions in there, you affect your egress. Or if they put in walls that may not go all the way up to the ceiling, and now you don't have a set egress path or a set exit to get out of that building, we'd have an issue. So we'd like to look at that, so it wouldn't be a situation I know initially we said we were going to try to take out the word structural alterations, and I just don't see a way that we can do that safely without running into other conflicts. Like I said, this is that other handout you have. I'm kind of walking through some of those things that are currently exempt. So I just wanted to everyone understand. So if you're painting your house, you're tiling your house, you're carpeting your house, there's no need for a permit. If you're doing cabinet work, cabinetry, like I said, we mentioned that you may need a plumbing permit based off if you're relocating your sinks and things like that, but you would need a building permit to do cabinet work. Also, temporary structures, like if the fair, if anybody comes to town, we don't permit temporary structures. Now, pools have gotten kind of different now because the state has instituted the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, and so now pools that are more than 24 inches deep, 24 inches deep would require a permit now, but that's a state law. So that's kind of where that one is. Swings and playground equipment, we don't require a permit, and awnings coming off your windows, if you're supported by an exterior wall, we don't require a permit. So those things are already exempt currently. And then as you see in the list, that attachment with you, there's also electrical exemptions, mechanical exemptions, and plumbing exemptions. I just didn't want to go through all of those, but portable devices being plugged up and you're just working on repairs and what we would consider as ordinary repairs. Like I mentioned to you the last time I came, that people typically, if you reshingle your roof, we're not going to require a permit. But it depends on if you start getting into the structure, that's when we would want you to pull a permit to verify what you're doing. So we put such repairs shall not include the cutting away of any wall, partition, or portion thereof, or the removal or cutting of any structural beam, load-bearing support, or the removal or change of any required means of egress. And that's kind of where that alteration came in. That's why we knew we couldn't just directly take out the word alteration. And then we put or the work affecting public health or general safety. Like I said, typically in commercial properties, we don't have the issue. It's the issue more in the residential houses and people wanting to make alterations to their houses and make sure they're doing it safely. And then obviously emergency repair. If something happens over the weekend, next business day, call us, let us know. We can inspect it and make sure it's okay. Certificate of occupancy, this is the one also that I'm looking to move over to the Columbus Code. We're currently having issues with churches and nonprofits moving into properties and making them assembly spaces, and they don't meet the requirements of such. We've got one that's currently zoned in LMI, and it's a church, and that's not allowed at all, but we didn't know. We saw somebody working on a roof, and we went and called them, and we said, hey, what's going on? And they're just like, well, we're a church. And they've been there like, some over a year now. And they're coming to finally come get a building permit. And now we're telling them, hey, these are the things you need to be doing. And because typically businesses that are nonprofit or churches don't need certificate of occupancies because they don't need a business license. They just say, hey, well, we'll do what we want. And I'm like, no, we need to change that. So that's why you see kind of underlined in there business license change or description change, because it was an existing property and they just moved in. They don't have the minimum acreage. They don't have the amount of off-street parking. I mean, they don't have any of that. And we're just, we're trying to kind of corral that so it doesn't get any worse. So that's where that is. And this is technically already, people are like, well, why, you just all of a sudden coming in and enforcing this. This is currently already in the UDO, that this section is here. It should not be occupied or change made in occupancy. It's already there, and it's been made. It's already there, but administratively, we just have not pushed it against churches. But if you're assembling 40, 50 people in a shotgun house, there's going to be issues. So we just want to make sure that these properties are coming to us, getting a certificate of occupancy, verifying that they are a church, and they're performing, they're having service, which is fine, but if they're having there would be considered an assembly space, and therefore there are certain parameters they need to meet. So, and like I said, we already mentioned about the temporary CO. We already talked about that may be issued, so there's not a hard and fast that it's no, but they can apply to us to get the partial. So, in conclusion, I'd like to repeal Article 8.9 of Chapter 10 of the UDO and then remove the conflicts that we have currently with the Columbus Code. All pertinent info that we mentioned about zoning and simultaneously permit submission will be moved to Chapter 8, Article 9. And then all the concerns of certificate of occupancy will be mentioned only in the code, and then all technical codes and definitions will be in Chapter 8. So, any questions?
Commissioners, are there any questions? Mr. Dudley.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I have a question on your emergency repairs section, and this may just be my lack of understanding of the process, but what you said about an emergency repair, if you got to make it over the weekend, just give us a call the next business day, doesn't sound quite the same as the permit application shall be submitted within the next working business day.
Well, it's not to diminish it, but it's to understand that if something happens or there's a storm or something and your carport fall in and you just, you just get a 2x4 to hold it up until you can get your permit and all that kind of stuff, we understand that kind of work. So it will be used sparingly. It's not like, oh, I have an emergency, here's my permit the next day. So no, it's more geared towards emergencies or natural disasters, things like that. So we don't have a problem fleshing it out, but like I said, I've been working with the city attorney's office, but like I said, I wanted to make sure I had y'all's blessing before we fully went in and started really working on it before I got too far down the road.
I have a question that's more procedural than anything. If you all, be it through your ride-bys or what have you, find out that someone's been in violation of one of these ordinances, are they fined?
Correct.
Okay.
So they're fined, and then they have the opportunity to come and get it. We try to give them some type of time to say, hey,
To correct it.
because you have some people who've never built anything,
Right.
and all of a sudden they're just building stuff on their house, and we allow them to come in so we can sit down and talk to them. But we do have a few repeat offenders that just hope we don't catch them. So it just depends on the level of if we've
Okay.
dealt with you before in prior instances.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant from our commissioners? Mr. Bollinger? I'm going to pull you in here.
And I too appreciate the PowerPoint and the presentation. I guess I still have a little bit of concern about the burden on our individual taxpayers and the wording in the document where it says ordinary minor repairs may be made with the approval of the building official without a permit. And what that specifically states is they have to come to the office to get approval to do a minor repair. And I understand the egress issue, but I think that also falls within the fire marshal's office. If they changed egress, that would be a violation of the fire code. And then likewise, on the emergency repair, if we had a storm on a Thursday, instead of calling their insurance company on Friday, they have to come to the building permit office to get a permit. And it just seems very burdensome, and I understand the spirit of what you're doing, and that's what we talked about last time. But the spirit and the actual wording context in the document are two different things. And if we change that wording, that gives the opportunity to go very strictly by the wording. And in a court of law, that's what they would look at, not the spirit. They would look at the wording. So now I'm sure this is going to probably pass, but I still have concern about the burden that we're placing on individual homeowners.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the commissioners? Okay. Do I hear a motion at this point? Mr. Greenblatt?
I'm going to try to do this the right way. This is a little bit, regarding REZN-12-16-2478, a request for a text amendment to amend the text of the Unified Development Ordinance UDO in regards to Section 10.8.2, Certificate of Occupancy, and Section 10.8.1, the building permits. I move for approval with the concerns stated by Mr. Bollinger about the burdensome context of this.
Okay.
Second.
And I have a second. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. On all of those opposed. So we have 4 in favor and 1 opposed. Thank you. I appreciate it. And that brings us to our new business, which is zoning case REZN-01-17-0136. This is a request for a text amendment to amend the text of the Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO, in regards to adding an overlay district on 2nd Avenue from 18th Street north to Manchester Expressway and 45th Street. This overlay will be created to promote and enhance the aesthetic qualities of the area. Mr. Harrod.
Thank you. We have been asked and partially initiated by the City Village Plan to come back and take a look at an overlay ordinance on 2nd Avenue to make sure that we have a beautiful gateway that comes into the downtown area. What you guys have in front of you is a proposed new ordinance overlay district that will be between Manchester Expressway, 45th Street, all the way down to 18th Street, which is where the bridge starts on 2nd. This will be 500 feet from the center line of 2nd Avenue heading out towards 1st Street, or 1st Avenue and 3rd Avenue. It has a few things that it will pertain to and some that it will not. It will not pertain to single-family residential homes. These are completely excluded from this overlay. It keeps the sidewalks in the area the same as required within the UDO currently now in in Chapter 7, Article 10, which is a 5-foot minimum, except for along 2nd Avenue between 35th Street and 38th Street, that they will be no less than 8 feet in width. And that is the area that was the downtown area of Bibb City. And so it automatically has that draw of a downtown, and we want to help it keep that feel, and that's what all the residents in that area had voiced back to us when we had 2 meetings out there talking about the proposed ordinance. It changes some of the landscaping requirements. We currently, I believe it is 20 tree density units whenever you're redeveloping a parcel. Because that is an urban area, we talked about reducing it down to 10 tree density units. So that way it lends to more of an urban feel, but it also allows them to use the space in which they have. When you start getting into what is old Bibb City, you have older parcels that are smaller parcels. So they're not what you're going to see at Columbus Crossing, which is kind of what that was designed for. So we're trying to figure out a way to still keep the beautiful trees that we have and make sure that there's enough greenery, but still allow for people to develop on their side the way they need to be able to develop on that side. And just to talk about the parking a little bit, we have proposed that parking be in the back. If they can't do the parking in the back of the development, then they can do what we've seen on Veterans, where they can put up a green shrubbery area or a berm that blocks basically the headlights from shooting out onto the road, and have some parking up front. We've dropped some of the standards on it, so if you have parking up front, your gross square feet of your parcel is 7,501 to 25,000, then you're allowed to have 10% parking up front. If you have 25,001 to 5,000, you can have 15%. 50,000 or greater, then 50,001 and greater, you can have 20% up front. We're hoping that most of this upfront parking, if it's needed, would be for ADA compliance, so that you have people that have a handicap that can park up front, get to the front of the building, and not have to walk around. Signage, we've put in that we would like to see monument signs, but also to add the shingle signs. So what you would normally see, like you see it in Savannah some, where they have a sign that's hanging off of their building that's basically about 24 by 36 inches, and has their name either on one side or the other. Actually, both. You can have it on both on this. That also lends to the feel of the area, that it was an old downtown, especially in the Bibb City part. And then we've added some things in there for building height, to give a 5-to-1 ratio, so that when you have single family, if you're butted up against, commercials butted up against single family, that they have to push back a little bit as they're moving up, so that there's not a shadow effect on that single family resident, but also so the single family doesn't feel as though they're being, if it was an apartment complex, that they're being looked over a fence and being stared down on by the people in the apartment complex. It adds for a little bit more feeling of comfort for the current single-family residents that are there if something does go in beside them. The outside disposal and storage areas is reminiscent to all the other overlay districts that we have, as well as the gas pump islands. We can see those on either the back or the side of the retail. So instead of having it at the front, once this is passed, you can't put it at the front. You can just put it at the side, kind of offset, or you can put it in the back of the building, so that the building will be forward facing. It allows for some variance in the architecture standards, which we don't currently have in the UDO, so this would put architectural standards within the area of the overlay. This is reminiscent of some of the other overlay districts that we have. Roofing materials, the color of the building, the type of material that you can use on the building. To have rooftop mechanical equipment shielded or hidden away so that you can't see it on the top. And that's, I'll turn it over to you guys if you have any specific questions on it. I can go into more
Yeah.
at any time.
Before we go further, let me say I was remiss in the previous case of not asking if there was anybody in the audience who wanted to speak for or against it, but we have no one in the audience except for one person, and I know why she's here. So just wanted to put that on the record. I did not ask for that. So back to this one. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Harrod? Mr. Dudley?
I have three. One, can you tell us a little more about the opinions expressed in the two public meetings and how those are reflected in here?
Sure. In the public meeting, what we did was, we did some design layouts for them to talk about and gave them a draft of what we were putting together. We wanted to make sure that we kept the same character and feel that it currently has, but also give them the ability to make it their own. And so we talked about, was there anything about the sidewalks that they wanted to change? Did they want to change the type of look of the sidewalk? Did they want to have vegetated strips between the curb cuts, or between the curb and the sidewalk? And they did, and so we added that in. We talked about the tree height. If there are required trees, like in the TDUs, there are required trees to go in, how high do you want those trees? Do you want them 30 feet high? Do you want them 20 feet high? Do you want a certain tree type that you want to put in? So they came back and said that using the tree types that we currently have in there would be fine. They wanted about a 20-foot high tree. And we do have on the right-hand side, if you're going south on 2nd Avenue, you do have the power lines that are there. And so we have to worry about that. Can you put something in that's not going to be trimmed by Georgia Power, that's going to, because we want to beautify the area. Then we talked about the sidewalk widths, and that's where the 8-foot came from within the Bibb City area. And then they were happy with the type of styles of being able to put in metal, brick, glass, being so that a developer can make something look very appealing, but also adhere to some of the older structures that are there.
Thank you. Second question, why is the intersection of 2nd Avenue and 42nd Street, or 42nd Street, not included in the focus areas? That's the one up by Godwin Creek Golf Course.
That is more of a commercial area, and those couple of areas were not, they're included in it, but they're not called out as specific zones. So they're not interest areas, because one, it's not a complete cross section where you have one road that is running all the way across and joining up on the other side of 2nd. So it'd be really hard for us to come in there and say, here's what you have to do. And it is in a low cut, and there's a hill on either side of it. And so what we don't want to do is make a problem where there's a sight distance problem when you're working with all that infrastructure.
Okay. And then my third question is, the list of purposes of the section starts out by saying, provides for an entrance that displays our textile manufacturing beginnings. I don't see anything in here that specifically does that. Is the assumption that this will allow for some future decision to display textile history?
It was a way to add in just preamble to this is what the area has grown up as, and that we want to make sure that we recognize that and that it is a gateway into Columbus.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Harrod from the commissioners? Mr. Bollinger?
Yes, under signage, it specifically states monument and shingle. And I believe I've read through this pretty comprehensively, but I did not see anything in here about billboards.
They are prohibited on 2nd.
Mr. John? No.
So is that under a different overlay?
It is inside the UDO.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Harrod from the commissioners? Mr. Greenblatt?
Just a point of interest, I guess, for me. I was noting for the drive-throughs, I guess for restaurants or banks or whatever else, you're trying to do that as a shielding. You want it either on the side or the rear of the building, correct?
Yes.
What if that is not possible? I know that you said there needs to be some type of hedge.
Then we will work with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason I ask is the Chick-fil-A out on Beaver Run Road, that was one where they actually made them drive it below grade level.
Yes.
But, you know, 300 yards across the street, you've got a Hardee's there that's right up there in the front, and you can see the drive-through and everything. It seems to me that we're putting a little bit of undue stress, and I understand that Hardee's is outside the overlay and Chick-fil-A is under the overlay, but it's in the same general area. And I think that just kind of,
Inconsistent.
well, and it just bothers me for business development, I guess is my question.
Mr. Johnson?
And one reason we put these overlays in Chapter 2 of the Unified Development Ordinance is because you can go get a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is exactly what Chick-fil-A did. And of course, as you said, and you were on the Highway 80 Overlay Committee, they dropped it below the road.
Right.
Which, hey, great. As far as Hardee's goes, we did have some issues, especially with the menu board, because it did not meet the overlay. Whether they went to the Board of Zoning Appeals or not, I do not recall.
But then again, right across the street, you've got the Wendy's, which is the exact same thing.
Yeah, and of course, Wendy's is pre-overlay.
Well, but that's my point, that, you know, you've got an inconsistency there within a very tight-knit area, and I think that, you know, we just need to be aware. And I think that some of these things, you know, you put a little bit of overburden on some business owners.
Can you hang on one second? Do you hear that? Is that people yelling, or we just have somebody?
Sounds like it's in the back. I'll check it.
Okay, I just wanted, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. But just a little bit of, you know, overburden on some business owners and not on others, I guess is the point I'm trying to make there. And not that it's a game changer, but it is a point of interest for myself.
Well, and Chick-fil-A is a great example out there on Beaver Run. They came in with their game plan. They came in knowing exactly what the overlay said, knowing what they couldn't meet, and they did apply for 3 variances, but they mitigated everything. They showed that they had a true hardship. That's why we put it in Chapter 2, so that you do have some relief if you can accomplish something. One of the hard ones is the gas tanks. You know, having them in the rear, having them on the side. Any gas station that you deal with will tell you they want to be able to see the pumps, they want to see who's out there for security reasons. And sometimes the layout of the property is not conducive to having them in the side or the rear. So we know it has challenges. Most of these overlays were created for undeveloped stretches of roadway. The only 2 that are really urban is 2nd Avenue, if approved, and Victory Drive. And Victory Drive, we have had some.
And that brings me to one other question about signage that Mr. Bollinger brought up. I understand the concept of the smaller signs and the monument signs, but then you've got a gas station there that has a, you know, 12, 14, 18-foot awning that has Marathon or whatever posted on it in neon. How do we address that, or is that just something we have to deal with?
Awning signs, things like that goes back to the UDO, that's just something we have to deal with.
Okay.
Are they an exempt sign, Kevin? Awning signs?
I believe they are only
I
from.
think that they're, the only group that has purview over an awning sign, for instance, is Uptown Facade Board.
Yeah.
Everywhere else, I think it's an exempt sign.
Okay. Clarification, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any other questions, commissioners, for Mr. Harrod or Mr. Johnson? Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak for this this rezoning? If you'll come forward and state your name and address, and please give us your information.
I'm Leah Braxton, 125 Almond Ridge Drive, Fortson, Georgia. I have been a part of a grassroots effort to clean up 2nd Avenue. And just before I start, how many of you are happy and feel good about what you see when you get off the north bypass and between that and between the time you hit the bridge by Teesa's coming downtown. Is there anybody that's really happy with that? Okay, so I know I've met a lot with Kevin and Rick and so forth, and we've gone through these. So I just, one of the last things that was added is keeping the beautification, historic character. I absolutely love the corner at 38th Street and the lights and doing things there to keep it. I love several of those homes coming down, coming on Second Avenue, but a lot of those have extreme deferred maintenance. There's not landscaping, there's not really anything. So we want to make sure that there is some bite in this. There is something that will have a lasting impact on the overlay that will result in Columbus, Georgia having a nice gateway, beautiful, coming from the north bypass down to our uptown area. So just the biggest things for our group. And I sat down, like I said, with Rick and Kevin. They've worked hard on this. Ken Henson, Dorothy McDaniel, and myself sat down and went through everything on this ordinance. And then I sat down later with this group and went through it. The biggest thing, just the TDUs and really trying to make sure that there are not variances on Second Avenue. If someone has a site and they have to put X number of trees on this property, X number of bushes, we don't want to see it on the back street. We want to see it on Second Avenue. So I really encourage, one of the things we asked was that have to go to council, and I certainly understand Rick's concern that was expressed, and Will and Kevin, that you're getting caught up in a lot of politics to go to there. Maybe it's better to stay with the city, but I would like to see something say we're not deviating from the amount of trees, and maybe even say how many trees you have to have there. Just don't go spread it on the rest of the site. We want this area to look good and want to be proud of it long term. So that's a concern. The next concern, Michael, you mentioned this about the big signs. We would like to know on the monument signs, and on my meeting early January, I asked Rick to ask Clifton, is there any way, this was Ken Henson's idea, who is an attorney, can we sunset these big signs on Second Avenue so that X number of years from now, not necessarily today, not tomorrow, not trying to do it in a year, but could there be a provision that even if it's, 2026, could we do that so that at a certain date, we know that these things are all taken care of, that there would be no pole signs, and when the monument signs would be something really nice there. I share your concern about the pump islands and what that looks like, and that would be nice to deal with. And then the 42nd Street, I know that was asked by you, James, that is a diagonal street, and it's not a true intersection, and that's why they felt like you can't, most all of these are dealing with square lots, and that's why we couldn't work with it. So, the curb cuts will be dealt with by GOT. We were concerned that you didn't get more of those, and we're really just concerned about the landscape and what the buildings look like. Believe it or not, there's a small temporary structure that was put up. I call it a circus tent at a tire store on Second Avenue, and over a year ago, 18 months ago, maybe longer, sent it to the city. There's nothing we could do about it. Those kind of things would be covered in this UDO. They would have to be approved by the city. And just want to make sure when those houses, although the houses are excluded from this, that's while they're being used as a single-family residence. So at the point someone wants to put a small business in there, correct me if I'm wrong, they have to go through this ordinance because they're going to have a commercial business license.
Yes, when it changes from single family to commercial or neighborhood commercial, then it will.
Okay, and so that's what we want to protect. And then lastly, just the buffer. We ask about there not be any parking on the city right-of-way or within the 5-foot landscape buffer. Looking at this UDO, it says a 5-foot setback, not a 5-foot buffer. We might want to look at that terminology. Just if someone has to stay off their building 5 feet, what can they do in that 5 feet? Does that mean I can have a driveway? Does that mean I can have anything? Or does it mean there is grass in the 5 foot that they own, not the city right away? And other than that, we're very excited to see this come to fruition. We've been pushing for it over 18 months, and just commend the city staff for trying to put this together, get it expedited for approval before we end up with a metal building asking to come on Second Avenue. Thank you.
Commissioners, do any of you have any questions or comments for Mrs. Braxton? Okay, thank you. So do I hear a motion, or is there any other discussion that you all would like to have regarding this? Okay. Do I have anybody that would like to make a motion? Mr. Etheridge?
Let's see how we basically want to say this, that we've got, in case of REZN -01-17-0136, I move approval of a request for a text amendment to amend the text of the Unified Development Ordinance in regards to adding an overlay district on 2nd Avenue from 18th Street north to Manchester Expressway or 45th Street. This overlay will be used to promote and enhance the aesthetic qualities of the area and is subject to the details that have been provided to us in the, by the planning department.
Thank you, Mr. Etheridge. Do I have a second? Mr. Greenblatt? Has a second. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. It is unanimous, so we will go ahead and send that on to council for approval. And that is all that we have today in terms of our cases. I would like to remind you that our next meeting is scheduled for February the 15th. Mr. Harrod, is there any other information that I need to bring forward?
We will be having GPA Fall Conference. I believe that is going to be August or September, Will?
I was thinking you had said September, but I could be wrong.
They haven't announced it yet on their
Oh,
website.
okay, maybe I'm
But because we're hosting it, we have privy to some of the information
Gotcha.
that, yeah.
Yeah, the 2017 Annual Conference of the Georgia Planning Association will be held here at the Trade Center, and the Marriott will be the conference hotel. They've been here, they were here in '05 and they were here in 2012. Again, we extend the same invitation to you all that we have in the past. We will pay you a registration fee. For those of you that work downtown, it'll be real convenient. We'll get you your agenda and whatnot and your packages. So just let us know if you're willing to attend, and that does include all the fun functions that we do in the evening. So
Do you know the date, or is that?
September 27th to September 29th. We really want a big crowd to show off what we've done here. The Beer and Wine Festival's on Saturday the 30th, so we want them to stick around for the weekend, as well as the Uptown Concert Series. So we're planning on meeting for those 3 days and hoping they stay and enjoy it for the rest of the weekend.
That'd be great. Thank you, Will, for that information, and we'll make sure that we pass this along amongst us with the agenda and everything. I do want to encourage you, commissioners, to put this on your calendar. I know that you don't have much information right now, but this is a service that the planning department is willing to give us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what they do and what we do. So I hope that you'll at least block that on your calendar for now. Anything else?
That's it.
We are adjourned. Thank you.